Hey, Dr. Christianson here with you. Forget carbs and fats, it's the fuel that matters. And I want to talk about how fuel is different and how your fuel intake can affect your thyroid and weight gain, and just to make sense of what kind of fuel is best for you. So for starters, I want to open up just the concept of fuel itself. We've talked a lot about whether carbs or fats are more important, but to your body, they're not that different down at a molecular level. They all break down as something called oxaloacetate. And even ketones do too, believe it or not. So they're all treated as fuel. And if your body has too much fuel, it's got to store the excess. When there's too little fuel, you'll pull some out of stores and burn it. And that's when it works right. There are times where your body cannot process fuel as well as it should. And I'll mention that too. Carbohydrates, all these types of fuel have pluses and have their minuses. There's good versions and bad versions. And so it's a matter of getting good versions of each and then a good total of all of them. So carbohydrates, what they bring to the table are resistant starch and fibers, also polyphenols, also many other phytonutrients we find in intact whole grains. The drawback is those that are higher in fructose can be more difficult for the body to process. Fats, the good thing about those is they can give us essential fats, the omega-3s, the omega-6s. The drawbacks about those, the trans fats are the biggest harm. Saturated fats are ones to where they're harmless at some level, but harmful at excess. The other kind of fuel we have would be ketones. And there are endogenous ones we make and exogenous ones we can ingest. So exogenous, we can get some from purified ketones like the gamma hydroxybutyrate, or some from medium chain triglycerides. And ketones, they're still a fuel. And so if your body has more fuel than it needs, you still can turn ketones into fat. And if there's less fuel total than you need, ketones don't make it work differently. To really round this out, there is one other compound we can burn as fuel, and that's alcohol. And alcohol, honestly, no clear positive. There were earlier studies suggesting cardiovascular benefit. Most of those are now in dispute. It seems that people that drink as a whole a little bit are healthier than those that drink none. But the problem, we call this a factor of selection bias. So those that don't drink are comprised of two different groups. There's those that choose not to, and those that medically cannot because they have poor health, they've had addiction history, they've got medications that are not compatible. And those people with those medical issues are often less healthy than those that lack those issues. So that's why non-drinkers have seemed to be less healthy, not because alcohol helps, but because some people that can't drink have other medical problems. In terms of negatives, well, cancer risk, brain aging, liver disease, those are some big drawbacks. So it does act like a fuel, but it does work quite differently in the other regards. So what kind of fuel is best based upon your health goals? If it's to improve your thyroid function, a mixture is ideal. You want some proteins, some good fats, some good carbs. You want your body to make some ketones on occasion as well. And that happens during intense exercise. That happens during even an overnight fast. You want to make sure you are getting lots of fibers, resistant starch, healthy proteins, and essential fatty acids. If your main goal is body weight, this is probably the most important single point. There's no one magic fuel and no one evil fuel. So all the large studies that have looked at low carb versus low fat versus ketogenic, there's no advantage. It's only the total fuel intake. It doesn't matter how you rearrange those. Once you look at the total, it makes no difference. Studies have tracked people as far as 2 years out, looking at mixed diets, low-fat diets, low-carb diets. And there definitely are some individuals to where they'll seem to do better on one of those versus another, but there's never a group difference. So for every one person that does better on low carb, there's another person that does better on low fat. And there's even more people to where they could do fine either way. So it's really the fuel total that matters. And athletic performance, this has been studied too. If you're talking about not so much competitive activities where you don't need high bursts of strength or activity, it may not make a big difference. You can probably burn fat for fuel and still have good endurance. When you're talking about things that are high-level competition in which you need high intense bursts of strength for periods of a few seconds or longer, then there is an advantage to having glycogen. And glycogen does come only from carbohydrate. So performance, competitive performance, carbs do help, but in the context of all the other nutrients as well. You still need essential fats, you still need protein for proper recovery. The other category would be brain aging. There's talk about how ketones or fats can help with brain aging. The data has not shown that that's the case just yet, though. The best approach really is to have some of all of those fuels. And ketones are probably good, but the funny thing is that if there's too much of those, that can be counterproductive for the brain. So your brain uses ketones as a fuel or as a building block. And paradoxically, the more you're forced to burn ketones as a fuel, the less of them you have in your brain to use as a building block. Your brain shifts to burning them, and it can no longer rebuild with them. So paradoxically, ketones are good, but it's the same thing we see over and over with hormones and nutrients, that there's a sweet spot, that too little can be bad, and too much can be bad in the same ways that too little can. Then also we think about overall health risk if there's differences to one type of fuel over another. So there's the ApoE gene, and that controls how your body circulates cholesterol and fats. If you've got a 4 variation, a 3-4 or a 4-4 genotype, you are going to be more apt to have risks from higher fat diets. So that's a case where you clearly are better off to be lower fat, higher in good carbs, still getting essential fats and getting quality protein. If your genotype is anything other than that for ApoE, you've got more options, and it probably doesn't make as big of a difference in terms of that particular risk. We also see in terms of lipid panels, like cholesterol panels, if your lipid panel runs really high in triglycerides, then you're someone that can be more sensitive to total carbohydrate and processed carbohydrate. So you're better off to have moderate amounts of carbs, healthy amounts of polyunsaturated fats, and monounsaturated fats, and still good quality proteins. If you run really high in your LDL cholesterol, you may be more sensitive to total fat intake, and you'd want to really reduce saturated fat and focus hard on high amounts of healthy fibers from unprocessed carbohydrates. Then the last category is about glucose metabolism, blood sugar. And it turns out that any kind of fuel will make your body fuel resistant. So for example, if you've got high blood sugar and you consume the same amount of food, of fuel, but you shift it away from carbohydrate and toward fat, what'll happen is your blood sugar can get better, but your triglycerides will get higher. And you could take another step and say you shift from, make yourself into a ketogenic state. You go all fat and so low in carbohydrate, you're forcing your body to burn ketones. Well, guess what? That high level of circulating ketones, that's a circulating fuel. And glucose, ketones, triglycerides, all they are is fuel that your body can't deal with. So you're leaving them in the blood or you're peeing them out in your urine. Imagine like airplanes coming into an airport and there's no room on the runway. It's too busy with the planes coming in. So you keep the planes up in the pattern. And that's what high glucose, high triglycerides, and high ketones are in the blood or the urine. They're fuel that has nowhere to go. And no one of them is radically different than the others. So let's move away from these versions of food being good or bad, and let's think about them more collectively as the fuel load. Take great care. We'll talk again really soon. Bye-bye.